I had thought it was a perfectly reasonable decision, hiring someone to clean the house while my entire family was away. After all, my husband was on a week-long business trip, the kids were staying with my sister, and I had a list of errands and work to finish. The house, an old colonial with narrow hallways and tall ceilings, felt emptier than usual, every creak in the wooden floorboards echoing through the rooms. I scrolled through a local service app, hesitated over a few profiles, then finally settled on a young woman named Clara Reyes. She seemed trustworthy, polite, and efficient, and her reviews praised her honesty and diligence. I left her a note with instructions, gave her a spare key, and hoped she would handle the work quietly and carefully while I attended to my day. It seemed simple, safe, and ordinary. About an hour later, my phone rang. Seeing Clara's name, I smiled, thinking she was calling to report she had finished. But her voice, when I answered, was not cheerful or professional. It was trembling, almost breaking, and carried a weight of panic I had never heard before. "Mrs. Langston," she whispered, her words quivering through the line. "Is there anyone else in the house?" My stomach dropped, a chill running down my spine. "No," I said, trying to steady my voice. "No one else is home. Why? What's going on?" There was a pause, heavy and suffocating, before she finally spoke again. There's a man upstairs. I saw him, and he looked right at me." My hand went cold, the phone almost slipping from my grip. "Clara, get out of there immediately. Lock the door behind you. I'm calling the police." My heart raced as I dialed 911, the words tumbling out in a panicked, breathless jumble. I explained that someone was inside my house, a man, unknown, potentially dangerous, and that my cleaner was trapped upstairs. The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional, giving instructions. "Do not go inside. Stay on the line. Officers are on their way." I gripped the steering wheel as I left the office in a blur, the street stretching endlessly before me, my mind racing through every possible scenario. I tried to call Clara again, but there was no answer. Each ring that went unanswered made the fear in my chest thrum harder, a drumbeat of pure panic. The drive home was unbearable. My thoughts looped. How could someone have entered? Every door had been locked. The windows had been shut tightly, yet Clara had seen him. My mind refused to accept it. I imagined burglars, intruders, someone watching my family's routines, waiting for the perfect moment. The possibility that a stranger was inside my home while I was oblivious was terrifying. The police promised they were close, but every second felt like an eternity. When I finally reached the house, I saw a cruiser parked in front, its lights reflecting off the cobblestone driveway. Clara was sitting on the front steps, her face pale, her hands trembling in her lap. I rushed to her, wrapped my arms around her in relief and fear. "Are you okay? Did he do anything? Where is he?" I whispered, scanning the shadows for movement. Clara's lips pressed tightly together, shaking her head. I don't know," she said softly, her voice quivering. He just disappeared into the back hall. I couldn't follow him. He moved so fast. I don't even think he wanted me to see him." Two officers approached, questioning Clara, and then began a methodical search of the house. Every room, every closet, even the attic and the basement was inspected. They found no one. No signs of forced entry. All doors and windows were intact, unbroken. Relief washed over me, but it was thin and fragile, layered with uneasiness. Clara recounted the encounter again, describing the man's face, sharp features, dark clothing, unsettlingly calm expression, and the officers exchanged glances that didn't reassure me. Something about the situation didn't add up. How could someone vanish in a house I had lived in for over a decade without leaving a trace? That night, sleep eluded me. I kept imagining footsteps in the hallways, shadows shifting in the corners of my rooms. Even the soft creak of my own furniture sounded like someone pacing, waiting, watching. The house, which had always felt safe, now carried an undercurrent of menace. I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had been upstairs was still here, hidden somewhere, observing silently. Every noise startled me. A dripping faucet, the hum of the refrigerator, even the rustle of paper on my desk. My mind clung to the image of that man, his eyes, and the way he had vanished without a trace. The next few days were a strange blur of tension and forced normalcy. I went about my usual routines, making breakfast, checking emails, tidying up, but every creak in the old floors, every gust of wind rattling the windows set my nerves on edge. Clara had promised she wouldn't return until I called her again, and I didn't blame her. After her terrifying encounter, I couldn't imagine asking anyone to step foot inside that house alone. And yet, despite the police's thorough sweep, the nagging suspicion that someone might still be there lingered, settling into the shadows of each room. I began examining every corner of the house myself, scanning for anything unusual. It was an old home, nearly a century old, and even the police had commented on its quirks. The way certain floorboards creaked under pressure, the hidden nooks and narrow passages that were easy to overlook. But instinct told me that something wasn't right, that someone had found a way to exploit those quirks in ways I couldn't see. I started noticing subtle signs that disturbed me even more. Small items slightly out of place, a chair that wasn't exactly where I had left it, a book lying open in the living room floor when I was certain I had put it back. At first, I chalked it up to absent-mindedness or Clara's cleaning, but a growing unease told me otherwise. The reality began to press in. Someone had been inside, and if they could do it once, they could do it again. The thought gnawed at me, keeping me awake at night, eyes darting toward the shadows when I lay in bed. Every tiny noise, a floorboard, a vent rattling, the hum of the fridge, sounded like footsteps, a silent presence pacing the halls, unseen but palpably close. 3 days after the initial scare, I decided to hire a second cleaner, someone to come in and help with the heavy lifting while I worked from home. I interviewed a woman named Leah Moore, who seemed competent and professional. I gave her the same instructions I had given Clara, and she arrived mid-morning, cheerful and polite. I stayed in the house for a few hours while she worked, though I kept myself busy with calls and emails, hoping to appear calm. At first, everything seemed normal. The floors were swept, surfaces wiped, dust removed. But as I wandered from room to room, I noticed something strange. Faint, irregular scuff marks on the carpet near the staircase. I paused, crouched down to examine them, and felt that familiar prickle of unease crawl up my spine. These marks weren't random. They were deliberate, patterned, as if someone had been pacing back and forth, familiar with the layout of the house. I brought it up cautiously to Leah, trying not to alarm her. She looked at the marks, shrugged, and said they might have been there before. But the look in her eyes, the way she hesitated, told me she believed me, just as Clara had. My rational mind fought against the fear. Maybe I was imagining things, becoming paranoid. Maybe the house's old age and my anxiety were creating illusions in my mind. And yet, deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something real and dangerous had embedded itself into the very structure of my home. That night, I stayed awake long past midnight, listening to the attic. There it was again, the soft, deliberate sound of footsteps, light and almost measured, pacing back and forth. My pulse quickened, my hands trembled as I reached for the phone to call Jerome. Jerome answered groggily, his voice calm, almost dismissive. "It's nothing, Claire. The house is old. It makes noises. Maybe a raccoon got in the attic or a branch scraped the roof. Go back to sleep." I wanted to argue, to insist, but his calmness only made me doubt myself for a moment. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps I had overreacted. But the rationalizations fell apart when the noises shifted from the attic to the hallway outside my bedroom door. There was a pause, as if whoever or whatever had heard me move. Then the sound of a chair being moved, softly scraping against the floor. My breath caught in my throat. The following morning, I called Clara again, wanting to hear her perspective and reassure myself that I wasn't imagining everything. She answered after a few rings, hesitant and cautious. Her voice was still trembling, though calmer than before. "Mrs. Langston," she said, "I thought about what happened, and I think you need to be careful. Whoever was in your house, I don't think it was random. They know the layout. They know when people are away. I think they could still be there." My stomach sank. That was exactly what I had feared but didn't want to admit. This wasn't a one-time intrusion. Someone had found a way into our home. Someone patient and intelligent. Someone hiding in plain sight. And as I stared down the long, dimly lit hallway that evening, I knew one terrifying truth. They hadn't left. They were still here, somewhere in the house, a silent presence that could strike at any moment. The next few days felt like walking through a nightmare I couldn't wake from. Every time I thought I could convince myself it was all in my head, some subtle sign proved otherwise. I started noticing things that were almost imperceptible at first. A door slightly ajar when I was certain I had closed it. A kitchen chair turned the wrong way. A shadow that lingered too long at the edge of my vision. I even caught myself holding my breath whenever I walked past the narrow hallway that led to the back of the house, where the intruder, or whatever had been inside, had first been seen. The thought of someone hiding in my home, someone who could move silently and vanish without leaving evidence, gnawed at my every moment of calm. I could no longer ignore that this was no random act of intrusion. Someone had planned this, and they were still here, hidden in plain sight, watching and waiting for the perfect moment to reveal themselves. Determined to regain some control, I began a meticulous search of every corner of the house during the daytime. I moved furniture, inspected cupboards, opened hidden closets, and even examined the attic, which I had previously dismissed as empty. Every step I took echoed too loudly in the silent rooms. Each creak of the floorboards reminded me of my vulnerability. Nothing seemed out of place, at least nothing obvious. Yet instinct told me differently. It was the little things, the faint impressions of presence that convinced me I was not alone. I realized the intruder had to be clever, intelligent, and patient. They knew the house, knew when it would be empty, and most unnervingly knew how to avoid detection. I decided to install discreet surveillance cameras in several rooms. I didn't want to confront the intruder blindly. I needed proof. I needed a plan. The cameras were small, easily hidden among the decor, and I connected them to my phone so I could monitor everything in real time. Watching the footage during the day provided some relief. Nothing moved, nothing changed, but the feeling of being observed never left me. At night, I slept fitfully, checking my phone repeatedly, imagining movement where there was none, feeling the house itself pulse with life that wasn't ours. It was exhausting, mentally and physically, but I refused to ignore the danger. I couldn't. Then, one evening, as I reviewed the footage from the previous day, my heart nearly stopped. In one frame, a shadow moved at the edge of the kitchen doorway. It was fleeting, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably human. My hands shook as I froze the video, enhancing the contrast, zooming in. There, just a flash of dark clothing, the glint of a watch or bracelet. Someone had been there, inside my house, unseen while I went about my day. My stomach twisted with dread. This was real. Someone had been living among us, silent, patient, and calculating. I couldn't tell anyone, not the police, not my friends, not even my husband yet. I had to gather more evidence, understand the extent of the intrusion before making any accusations. I started taking notes of everything unusual, missing or moved items, small disturbances that I had previously overlooked, sounds I had ignored. Every sound of scraping, shifting furniture, or creaking floorboards became part of a pattern I tried to map out, desperate to understand where the intruder might be hiding. The more I observed, the more I realized how intimately they must know the house. The thought that someone could move undetected through the rooms, living among us without leaving clear traces, was terrifying beyond anything I had imagined. One night, I decided to stay awake, sitting in the living room with a flashlight in hand, determined to catch the intruder in the act. Hours passed, and I heard nothing at first, just the faint hum of the refrigerator, the wind brushing against the windows, my own heartbeat in the silence. Then, slowly, a noise from upstairs. Soft, deliberate, methodical steps pacing back and forth. My pulse quickened, my body tense, every nerve on fire. I whispered into my phone, calling Clara for reassurance, though I knew she was far away. She didn't answer. The footsteps grew slightly louder, then stopped suddenly, leaving an eerie stillness in the air. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe, just stared at the staircase leading to the upper floors. Someone was up there. I knew it, felt it in the pit of my stomach, and yet there was nothing I could do but wait, frozen in terror. Days turned into a tense routine of vigilance. I installed more cameras, reinforced locks, and even began sleeping with the flashlight and pepper spray beside me. Despite these precautions, I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched, of someone lurking just beyond my line of sight. The intruder's presence was subtle, intimate, a silent invasion that made me question everything. Had they been observing my habits for weeks? Months? How long had they been in the house before Clara had arrived? These questions haunted me. I felt trapped, not just physically in my own home, but mentally, aware that every corner might conceal danger, every shadow a silent observer. Then came the first unmistakable clue that the intruder was not only present, but bold enough to interact with their environment. I found a small pile of notes, neatly stacked, tucked behind a book on the living room shelf. The handwriting was precise, deliberate, a chilling demonstration that someone had taken the time to record details about my life, my routines, my schedule. This was no ordinary criminal. This was someone meticulous, calculating, and terrifyingly close. They weren't just in the house, they were mapping it, understanding it, living in it as silently as a ghost, invisible, yet omnipresent. By the end of that week, my fear had transformed into a quiet, burning resolve. I couldn't ignore the intruder's presence any longer, nor could I remain passive. The house that had once been my sanctuary had become a battleground, and I realized I would have to confront the intruder directly if I hoped to reclaim it. My mind raced with plans, traps, cameras, timed alerts, every measure designed to corner this silent, intelligent intruder. I knew the risk was enormous. I knew that one wrong step could have disastrous consequences. But I also knew that I could no longer allow my home to be occupied by a stranger, someone who had already proven they could evade detection and manipulate the very fabric of my life without my knowledge. By the time Thursday rolled around, my nerves were stretched thin. Sleep had become a rare commodity, my nights haunted by imagined movements and the shadow of someone silently observing me. I couldn't rely solely on cameras or locked doors. I needed to understand the extent of the intrusion, where the intruder was hiding, and how they had managed to live in my home undetected. I resolved to investigate the house during the day, moving from room to room, checking corners, cupboards, and hidden nooks. Every sound, a creak, a draft, the faint hum of an appliance, made my heart race. I moved carefully, as though the intruder could sense every motion I made, ready to slip into the shadows at the slightest noise. In the study, I noticed something odd. A bookshelf that I had examined countless times suddenly seemed off-kilter. I crouched down, inspecting the floor behind it, and felt a small indentation in the carpet. My stomach clenched. Someone had been here recently, shifting the furniture, leaving subtle signs of their presence. I pulled the shelf forward and gasped. Behind it was a tiny gap, just enough for a small person to squeeze through. A hidden space, dark and dust-laden, like a secret alcove. My mind raced. Could this be where the intruder had been hiding? The thought made my blood run cold. Whoever had done this knew the house intimately, had mapped it out, and had found ways to remain unseen. I backed away slowly, my pulse hammering in my ears. I debated whether to call the police immediately or continue investigating myself. Logic said I should wait for help, but my instincts told me I needed more information before taking action. I returned to the living room and examined the notes I had found the week before, the neat, calculated handwriting that had cataloged my routines. One particular note caught my attention. It detailed the timing of Clara's cleaning schedule, the exact hours I would be out of the house, and even observations about small household habits. Whoever had written this had been watching, studying, planning. This was no longer random. It was deliberate, methodical, and dangerous. As I moved through the kitchen, I noticed faint footprints in the dust along the windowsill. They were small, light, deliberate. Someone had paced back and forth, tracing a path only they could navigate silently. My mind reeled, with possibilities. How long had this person been living here? How much had they seen, learned, and manipulated? I realized that my home, the place that had always felt safest, had become a playground for a stranger, someone who could observe, hide, and vanish without leaving a trace. Every door, every floorboard, every shadow seemed to hold secrets now, and I felt trapped within my own walls. Determined to gather undeniable proof, I set up additional cameras, this time focused on the hidden corners I had discovered. I positioned one in the study, another in the hallway leading to the alcove behind the bookshelf, and a third near the staircase. I didn't want to alert the intruder. They had to think they were invisible. Watching the footage over the next few hours, I caught subtle movements, a shadow flitting past the staircase, a door handle moving as if someone had just brushed it, the faint sound of soft footsteps on the creaking wood. Each tiny anomaly reinforced the terrifying truth. Someone was living in my house, and they were clever enough to avoid detection completely. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay in bed, flashlight in hand, listening to the faintest sounds, the whisper of air through the vents, the soft scrape of wood, the almost imperceptible shuffle of footsteps in the upper hall. I kept imagining the figure I had glimpsed behind the bookshelf, imagining them watching me as I moved through the rooms. The tension was unbearable, a constant pulse of fear that gnawed at the edges of my mind. By the first light of dawn broke through the curtains, I had resolved that I could no longer ignore the intruder. If I wanted to reclaim my home, I had to confront the presence directly. The following day, I began systematically searching the house, focusing on hidden spaces and overlooked corners. I examined closets, attics, behind furniture, and even under the floorboards where the house creaked in protest. Every room held its own secrets, its own echoes of someone's presence. As I crouched in the study, dusting the shelves, I felt a strange, almost imperceptible shift in the air. I froze, straining to hear. There it was, a soft, deliberate exhale, almost like a breath held too long. My pulse raced. The intruder was close. I could feel it. I reached for my phone, ready to call for help, but paused. They were here, somewhere in the same room, unseen yet terrifyingly present. I spent hours that day documenting, photographing, and analyzing everything. The more evidence I collected, the more I realized the intruder's skill. They were patient, intelligent, and calculated. A shadow among shadows. I began keeping a journal of every small sign: footprints, misplaced objects, faint noises, subtle changes in light and dust. Every detail mattered, and I knew that if I could map their movements, I might have a chance to confront them safely. But with each passing moment, my fear grew, mingled with anger and determination. This person had invaded my sanctuary, manipulated my space, and defied my sense of security. And I was going to find out who they were, even if it meant stepping into the darkness myself. By evening, I had constructed a mental map of the house, marking areas of suspicious activity and hidden alcoves. I realized the intruder had likely chosen specific hiding spots, moving silently and carefully through the house while I was distracted. Every creak, every shadow, every shifted item was part of their silent communication with the space, a sign of intelligence and cunning. I understood then that this was no ordinary intruder. They were living among us, invisible yet omnipresent, and it was only a matter of time before I would come face to face with them. The nights had grown unbearable, each creak of the old Savannah house echoing like a warning. I decided that I could no longer sit idly, waiting for the intruder to reveal themselves on their own terms. It was time to take a calculated risk. I gathered my flashlight, my phone, and a small can of pepper spray, my last line of defense, and steeled myself for what I knew might be the most terrifying moments of my life. I planned to explore the second floor systematically, checking each room, every closet, and the hidden alcove I had discovered behind the study's bookshelf. My heart pounded, my hands trembled, but a quiet determination replaced the paralyzing fear I had felt for weeks. As I ascended the staircase, the floorboards groaned under my weight. I paused at the top, listening intently. Nothing. Just the familiar hum of the refrigerator from below, the occasional whistle of wind through a cracked window, and the faint sound of my own breath echoing in the hall. I flicked on the flashlight, its beam cutting through the dimness, illuminating the hallway and the doors that led to bedrooms long untouched. The house felt alien, familiar yet sinister. Shadows clung to corners, hiding secrets, and the air seemed heavier, almost thick with anticipation. My pulse accelerated with every step, every sound, each moment stretching longer than the last. I began with the first bedroom on the left. It was empty, dust motes dancing in the narrow beam of light, untouched since the last cleaning. Nothing seemed out of place. I moved methodically, checking closets, drawers, and behind the doors. Every empty space heightened my unease. It was almost worse knowing the intruder could be anywhere, waiting for the precise moment to strike or retreat. I reached the far end of the hallway, where the hidden alcove behind the bookshelf was located. My hand trembled as I pushed the shelf aside, revealing the small, dark space. It was empty. The alcove had been cleared, leaving only the faint smell of old wood and dust. Whoever had been hiding there had left recently or had been watching me, anticipating my search. As I stepped back into the hallway, I heard it. A soft whisper, so faint I thought I imagined it at first. Then a light shuffle of feet, deliberate and slow, coming from the room at the end of the hall. My breath caught. Someone was there. Someone was watching me. My flashlight flickered slightly as I pointed it toward the source of the sound. For a brief second, I saw movement, a shadow slipping just beyond the doorway, retreating into darkness. My body froze, terror gripping me like a vice. I raised my phone to call for backup, but the battery was dead. My last line of defense was pepper spray and courage, both of which I now needed in full measure. I stepped forward, each footfall calculated, each movement measured to avoid making noise that would alert the intruder. I whispered, "I know you're there. You can't hide forever." The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, the shadows growing longer, darker, as if the house itself was conspiring against me. Then came a pause, a moment so still it was almost unbearable. My flashlight caught a glimpse of movement again, a figure at the corner of my vision, too fast to identify clearly. I swung the beam, heart hammering, and for the first time, I saw the intruder clearly. She was small, slight, and impossibly agile, dressed in dark clothes that blended perfectly with the shadows. Her eyes, wide and intelligent, met mine for a split second before she darted toward the staircase leading to the attic. My heart skipped a beat. This wasn't a random intruder. This was someone who knew the house intimately, someone who could anticipate every move, someone who had been living here, observing every routine, every habit. I chased after her, moving cautiously, trying not to make any noise that could alert her further. The staircase to the attic creaked under my weight, betraying my presence, but she didn't stop. She was fast, confident, and utterly unafraid. Reaching the attic, I paused at the doorway, flashlight sweeping the small, cluttered space. Nothing. Dust lay undisturbed, old boxes stacked neatly, except for one area where the floorboards seemed slightly lifted. My instincts screamed at me. She was here, hiding just beyond my reach. I edged closer, every nerve on fire. Then a whisper. "You shouldn't have come up here." The voice was calm, almost serene, but carried an undeniable authority, as though the intruder had been expecting me. My pulse spiked, adrenaline coursing through me. I wasn't sure whether to run or confront, but I knew that hesitation could be fatal. The moment stretched unbearably. I scanned the room again, flashlight trembling in my hand. That's when I saw her, a shadow moving beneath the floorboards, just enough for me to glimpse her presence. My mind raced. This person had prepared this space, anticipated every search, and yet there was a vulnerability. The very fact that she revealed herself meant she was confident, perhaps overconfident. I whispered, "I'm not leaving. You need to come out." Silence. Then, slowly, the floorboards shifted, a trapdoor creaking open, and she stepped into the light. Her eyes met mine fully this time, calm and calculating. "You've been watching me," she said softly, almost conversationally, "just as I've been watching you." My stomach dropped. She wasn't just hiding, she had been observing my every move, understanding my routines, predicting my actions. A chill ran down my spine. This was no ordinary criminal. She was patient, intelligent, and methodical, a shadow among shadows. And now she was standing in front of me, calm, poised, and in control. The intruder's presence was suffocating, yet eerily composed. She didn't rush or panic. Instead, she stood silently, as though the house itself recognized her as one of its own. I kept my flashlight trained on her, every instinct screaming to maintain distance, every nerve alert to any sudden movement. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice trembling despite my attempt to sound firm. The woman's lips curved into a faint, almost enigmatic smile. "I've been here longer than you realize," she said softly, almost wistfully. "This house, it's not just a building. It's memories, it's history. And some things, some people, never truly leave." My stomach churned as her words sank in. She wasn't here for robbery or random mischief. There was a deeper, more personal reason behind her presence, one I had yet to comprehend. As I studied her, I noticed her eyes, sharp, calculating, yet strangely sorrowful. She moved with deliberate grace, inspecting the attic as though reacquainting herself with an old home. My fear mingled with curiosity. How could someone live here unnoticed for so long? How had she learned to navigate the creaking floors, the narrow hallways, and the hidden alcoves without detection? Every instinct told me she was extraordinarily intelligent. Someone who had studied the house, its rhythms, and the people within it with meticulous care. And now, confronted directly, she seemed almost disappointed. Disappointed that I had finally discovered her. I lowered the pepper spray slightly, my mind racing. "Why are you here?" I asked again, softer this time, though my voice still carried an edge. The woman's lips curved into a faint, almost enigmatic smile. "I've been here longer than you realize," she said softly, almost wistfully. "This house, it's not just a building. It's memories, it's history, and some things, some people, never truly leave." My stomach churned as her words sank in. She wasn't here for robbery or random mischief. There was a deeper, more personal reason behind her presence, one I had yet to comprehend. As I studied her, I noticed her eyes, sharp, calculating, yet strangely sorrowful. She moved with deliberate grace, inspecting the attic as though reacquainting herself with an old home. My fear mingled with curiosity. How could someone live here unnoticed for so long? How had she learned to navigate the creaking floors, the narrow hallways, and the hidden alcoves without detection? Every instinct told me she was extraordinarily intelligent. Someone who had studied the house, its rhythms, and the people within it with meticulous care. And now, confronted directly, she seemed almost disappointed. Disappointed that I had finally discovered her. I lowered the pepper spray slightly, my mind racing. "Why are you here?" I asked again, softer this time, though my voice still carried an edge. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped closer, her movements deliberate and unthreatening. "I'm here because I belong here," she whispered, "not in the way you think, but in ways that matter. You see, this house has always had shadows, forgotten corners, neglected spaces, rooms that go unnoticed. People come and go, but some presences remain. I am one of those presences." The words chilled me. She wasn't just hiding, she was claiming, observing, and existing in spaces most people overlooked. I realized then that this wasn't a random intruder. This was someone intimately connected to the house, perhaps a former occupant, a distant relative, someone with unresolved ties to the home's history. She wasn't violent, not in the conventional sense, but her knowledge, her ability to blend invisibly into the environment was almost supernatural. I noticed small details, the way she moved, how she seemed to know which beams of light would conceal her, the precise timing of her footsteps. Every movement was calculated, deliberate, and yet there was an emotional weight in her presence, a story that had yet to be told. Desperate for answers, I tried to engage her. "You can't just live here. This is my home." My voice cracked. She tilted her head slightly, as though examining my reaction. "Home," she repeated softly. "It's not about ownership, it's about presence. Some things can't be claimed by law or title. They persist, they linger, and some of us, we linger with them." My mind struggled to keep up with her cryptic words. Was she talking about memories, spirits, or something entirely different? The air around us felt electric, as if the house itself was responding to our confrontation, creaking and sighing in the tension of the moment. I took a careful step forward, keeping the flashlight trained on her face. "Then tell me," I said firmly, trying to mask the trembling in my voice. Her gaze softened, almost wistfully. "I've waited." Watched silently, making sure no one disturbed the balance here. You see, some things need time, patience, observation. You're different, but you're the first to notice, the first to understand, and that changes everything. Her words hung in the air like a heavy fog. I realized she had been here long before Clara, long before my husband and I had settled in. She had been living alongside us in the shadows, waiting for the moment when she would finally be acknowledged. I swallowed hard, fear and fascination warring within me. Could I trust her? Could I even understand her motives fully? Every instinct screams caution, yet the weight of curiosity pressed heavily against me. I realized then that the story of my home, the creaking floors, the hidden alcoves, the shifting shadows, had a chapter I had never read until now. And she, this intruder, was both the author and the inhabitant of that chapter. There was history here, secrets I had never imagined, and a presence that refused to be ignored. We stood there in silence for what felt like hours, the tension stretching thin across the attic. I tried to absorb every detail, her expressions, the subtle movements, the way she seemed to meld with the shadows, yet remain profoundly human. I understood then that this confrontation was only the beginning. She wasn't just an intruder to be expelled. She was a living puzzle, a mystery woven into the very fabric of the house. And if I hoped to reclaim my home, to feel safe again, I would have to understand her motives, and the secrets that she had carried with her into my life. By the time I descended the attic stairs, my mind was racing, my pulse still high, but I had made a silent promise to myself. I would not allow fear to rule me. I would uncover the truth, piece by piece, until I understood exactly who this intruder was, why she had been living among us, and what her ultimate plan entailed. The house, once a sanctuary, had become a battleground of intellect, patience, and courage. And I knew that the story was far from over. The intruder had revealed herself, but the deeper mysteries, the real danger, and the ultimate twist were still lurking, just out of reach, waiting for the next move in this silent, shadowed war.
Days passed in a haze of tension and unease. Sleep remained elusive. Every creak of the old Savannah house, every shifting shadow, felt like a whisper from the intruder herself. I couldn't simply ignore her presence anymore, but I also couldn't force her out without understanding why she had been living here. That night, armed with determination and a small notebook, I sat in the dim light of the living room, replaying every encounter, every word she had spoken. Something about her tone, her movements, even her cryptic explanations suggested that she wasn't acting out of malice. Yet the fear she inspired was real and undeniable. I realized I needed to know her story, her past, her connection to the house, and the reason she had remained hidden for so long. I began a careful investigation, searching through old letters, journals, and photo albums left behind by Jerome's family. The house itself had a history that I had barely scratched the surface of, filled with generations of lives, memories, and secrets. I discovered photographs of a young woman who bore an uncanny resemblance to the intruder, taken decades ago in various corners of the house. She was listed as a distant cousin of Jerome's family, someone who had vanished suddenly under mysterious circumstances. One photograph showed her standing in the very hallway where I had first glimpsed the shadow, a faint smile playing on her lips. My heart raced. Could this be the same person, somehow connected across decades, her presence persisting in ways that defied logic? I felt an almost magnetic pull toward the attic, the place where our confrontation had first occurred. Every step up the creaking staircase brought me closer to the tension that had haunted me for weeks. I scanned every corner, every beam of shadow, trying to anticipate the intruder's movements. But the space felt empty, eerily calm. And yet I could feel her presence, almost tangible, like a weight pressing against the air itself. My mind raced with possibilities. Had she been hiding here all along, observing, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal herself? Or had she been orchestrating events to ensure I would notice her, to finally acknowledge her existence in the house? Suddenly, I heard a soft shuffle behind me. I spun around, flashlight cutting through the darkness, and there she was, standing silently, watching me. She didn't speak, didn't move toward me, but her gaze was intense, almost imploring. I realized in that instant that the house had been her domain long before we arrived, and I had unknowingly stepped into her world. "Why are you really here?" I asked, my voice trembling, a mixture of fear and curiosity. This time, she spoke without hesitation. "I've been guarding this house, watching over it, making sure its stories, its memories are preserved. Some things cannot be lost, not even to time. And some people, they are meant to witness, to protect, to remember." Her explanation was chilling and mesmerizing. She wasn't simply hiding, she was safeguarding a legacy, a connection to the past that no one else had recognized. I felt a strange mix of awe and dread. This house, which I thought was mine, was inextricably linked to her presence. She had been here longer than I had ever imagined, observing, learning, and quietly influencing the rhythm of daily life. Her actions, once terrifying, now seemed purposeful, even protective. Yet the fact that she had lived among us secretly, unseen and unknown for weeks, left my mind spinning. I sat across from her in the attic, flashlight trembling in my hand, and watched her carefully. There was a quiet dignity in her movements, a calmness that belied the chaos she had introduced into my life. "You've been here all this time?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, her eyes reflecting the dim light like mirrors of memory. "Not all the time, not constantly. I come and go, observe, ensure nothing is disturbed. This house holds stories, secrets. Some are beautiful, some are tragic. I am here to witness them, to protect them from being forgotten." Her words carried weight, an almost spiritual resonance that left me unsettled yet captivated. As the hours passed, I began to understand the depth of her presence. She had lived not merely in the physical spaces of the house, but in its history, its memories, its essence.
She was the shadow of the past, a living guardian of what once was and what could not be allowed to vanish. And yet, her intrusion had transformed my life, forcing me to confront the fragility of my own sense of safety and the mysteries that lingered within the walls I had always trusted. I realized that fear and fascination were intertwined, and that understanding her story was the only way to reclaim peace in my home. By the time dawn broke, a fragile truce had formed. She did not retreat, and I did not attack. Instead, we sat together in silence, bound by the shared knowledge of her presence, the legacy of the house, and the delicate tension between fear and understanding. For the first time, I began to see her not as a threat, but as a keeper of secrets, a figure who had existed in the margins, whose life had intertwined with mine in ways I was only beginning to comprehend. And while the mystery was far from resolved, the attic no longer felt like a place of terror, but a threshold between the past and the present, where stories waited to be revealed and understood. The days that followed were a delicate dance of observation and conversation. I cautiously adjusted to the knowledge that the intruder was not merely hiding, but living in the house for reasons that were deeply personal, almost sacred. Still, a gnawing unease remained. Knowing she was present in the shadows of my home was like sharing my sanctuary with a ghost that could appear at any moment. I realized I had to confront the ultimate truth. Why had she truly been here? What secrets was she guarding? And why had she chosen now, after all these years, to reveal herself? Late one evening, after the house had fallen into silence, I followed the subtle signs she left behind. A displaced book here, a slight movement of a curtain there, leading me to the study. I found her standing in front of an old, dust-covered desk, staring intently at a faded photograph of Jerome's ancestors. Her back was to me, but I could feel the weight of her gaze, as though she had anticipated my approach. "You've been avoiding the truth," I said softly, trying to steady my voice. She didn't turn. Instead, she lifted the photograph, her fingers tracing the faces frozen in time. "The truth," she said, her voice tinged with sorrow, "is that this house holds more than just memories. It holds debts, promises, unfinished stories, and some of us are bound to them, whether we like it or not." I stepped closer, heart pounding. "Bound? What do you mean? Who are you really?" She finally turned to face me, and I saw something that made my breath catch. The resemblance to the photographs I had discovered was undeniable. Her eyes mirrored the same intensity, the same quiet determination. "I am the last of my line," she whispered. "My family lived here generations before Jerome's. We were caretakers, stewards of this house, tasked with preserving its legacy. When my time came, I stayed. I remained unseen, to ensure that the history would not be lost. And now, I am here to see that it is respected, that the stories remain intact." Shock coursed through me. This was no ordinary intruder. She was a living link to the house's history, someone whose presence had been woven into its very fabric. The fear I had felt for weeks suddenly shifted into something more complex: awe, confusion, and an almost reverent curiosity. Yet I could not ignore the practical reality. She had been living here secretly, monitoring me, potentially putting me and anyone else in danger. "You could have told me," I said, my voice shaking. "We could have worked together. You didn't have to scare me like this." Her gaze softened, almost regretful. "I did not wish to frighten you," she said quietly, "but appearances can be deceiving. Fear is sometimes the only way to make the living acknowledge the presence of the past." I absorbed her words, realizing that her motives, while extreme, were not malicious. She had acted as a guardian, a silent observer, ensuring that the legacy of the house endured. And yet, the thought that she had been living in the attic, moving through hidden passages, and observing every corner of my life was almost too much to process. My mind raced with questions. How had she survived undetected for so long? How had she learned to move through the house without leaving any trace? And why had she chosen to reveal herself now after all these years? The intruder, or more accurately, the caretaker, spoke again, her voice breaking the heavy silence. You must understand that houses like this are alive in ways most people cannot perceive. They remember. They hold the echoes of everyone who has lived here. I am a vessel for those echoes, a witness, and now you are part of their story, part of the house's history. That is why I chose to show myself, to acknowledge you, and to ensure that you understand the gravity of your presence here. I felt the weight of her words settle over me like a dense fog. The fear I had carried for weeks was now intertwined with something else: respect, reverence, and an almost cautious understanding of the hidden world I had never seen. I realized then that the intruder was not an enemy to be defeated, but a guide to a deeper truth, someone whose presence had been misunderstood and misjudged. She had revealed herself not to harm, but to illuminate the unseen, to teach me that the house had layers beyond my perception. And while the knowledge brought relief, it also brought responsibility. I could no longer treat this home as merely a place of comfort. It was a living entity, one with histories, secrets, and presences that demand acknowledgement and care. As dawn approached, I felt a strange calm settle over the house. The intruder remained in the study, silent, but no longer threatening. Her presence had shifted from ominous to enlightening, transforming the fear that had gripped me into a profound awareness of the house's hidden depths. I realized that the climax of my fear had passed, but the story was far from over. The intruder's secret had been revealed, her motives understood, and the tension now lay in what choices I would make moving forward: how to live with this knowledge, how to respect the past, and how to navigate the thin line between fear and understanding. The house, once a sanctuary, had become a bridge between past and present, between seen and unseen. And while the intruder's shadow would always linger in my awareness, it was no longer purely a source of terror. It was a reminder that some presences, no matter how hidden, shape our lives in ways we cannot ignore, and that the true story of a home is never fully visible until one dares to confront the secrets it holds.
In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the house shifted. The once oppressive tension gave way to a fragile coexistence. I began to see the intruder, or caretaker as I had come to think of her, not as a threat, but as a living archive of the house's history. Each morning, I would hear her footsteps echoing faintly through the hallways, but the sound no longer triggered panic. Instead, it reminded me that the house was alive in ways I had never imagined. I started leaving small notes for her in places she might notice: a cup of tea on the windowsill, a light left on in the study. In turn, she began leaving subtle signs of her presence: a broom leaned neatly against the corner, a forgotten book returned to its rightful shelf, a window cracked open to let in the breeze. These silent exchanges created an unspoken understanding between us, a dialogue that transcended words. Despite this growing understanding, a lingering mystery remained. There were rooms in the house I had never entered, closets and attics that even she seemed hesitant to approach. I knew the final piece of the puzzle lay somewhere in those forgotten spaces, and a part of me feared what I might find. One evening, compelled by curiosity and necessity, I ventured into the attic once more. The caretaker followed at a distance, her presence calm yet vigilant. The air was thick with the scent of dust and old wood, the dim light casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. As I moved through the space, I discovered a hidden trapdoor partially obscured by stacks of old trunks and boxes. My pulse quickened. This was it, the threshold to the secret she had been guarding for so long. With her watching silently behind me, I lifted the trapdoor. A narrow, steep staircase descended into darkness. I hesitated, flashlights trembling in hand, before stepping down. The space below was small, almost like a forgotten cellar, but its contents were extraordinary. Shelves lined with journals, photographs, and personal belongings of Jerome's ancestors filled the room. Every item was meticulously cataloged, as if someone had dedicated their life to preserving these fragments of history. The caretaker stepped closer, her eyes reflecting both pride and sorrow. "This is the heart of the house," she said softly. "Everything that has been lived here, every joy, every sorrow, every secret, it all resides in this room, and it has been my duty to protect it from being lost or destroyed." I moved among the shelves, running my fingers over faded pages, old letters, and sepia-toned photographs. Each object told a story, a fragment of lives that had unfolded within these walls. And yet, one particular photograph caught my eye. A woman standing in the hallway, her expression hauntingly familiar. My breath caught as I realized it was the same figure who had appeared weeks ago, the intruder herself, though decades younger. The caretaker's voice broke my thoughts. "She was my sister," she said quietly, her tone heavy with grief. "She died tragically in this house, long before you and Jerome arrived, but she never truly left. I have kept her memory alive, watching over her, ensuring that she is never forgotten. And when you moved in, I needed you to recognize her presence, to honor it, just as I have." Shock and awe mingled in my chest. The intruder's motives were no longer just mysterious. They were profoundly personal, rooted in love, loss, and loyalty. My fear gave way to compassion, and I understood why she had remained hidden yet vigilant. The house had been her refuge, her responsibility, and her connection to a past she could never abandon. I turned to her, voice trembling. I I understand now. I see why you did what you did. I see why you needed to reveal yourself." She nodded, her eyes glistening with emotion. "And now the story can continue. But it is not enough for me to watch alone. You must carry it forward, to remember, to honor, to protect." As I absorbed her words, I realized that the true twist of this story was not her presence, but the depth of her connection to the house, to its history, and to the lives that had passed through it. The intruder was not an intruder in the conventional sense. She was a guardian, a custodian of memories, a bridge between past and present. The fear and tension that had dominated my life for weeks transformed into reverence and responsibility. I understood that living in this house meant more than occupying space. It meant respecting its stories, its shadows, and its unseen guardians. In the quiet that followed, I felt a profound shift within myself. I was no longer merely a resident. I had become part of the house's history, part of the intricate web of life and memory that the caretaker had protected for so long. And while the intruder's presence would always linger, it was no longer a source of terror.
It was a reminder that some stories are too important to be forgotten, that some lives leave an imprint that endures beyond death, and that the true weight of a home lies not in its walls or furnishings, but in the echoes of those who came before. As night fell, the house settled into a serene quiet, the shadows no longer threatening, but watchful, protective. The caretaker remained in the attic, a silent sentinel, while I descended to the living room, a sense of peace settling over me. I knew the final chapter had yet to be written, but for the first time, I felt ready to face it, with understanding, respect, and a newfound awareness of the unseen forces that shaped my life. The intruder had revealed herself, the secrets had been uncovered, and the story of the house, its mysteries, its tragedies, and its guardians, was now intertwined with mine, a living testament to the power of memory, vigilance, and the hidden threads that connect past and present. The weeks following my discovery were a delicate balance between normal life and the lingering presence of the caretaker. The house no longer felt like a threat, it felt alive, vibrant, and haunted by history in a way that demanded respect. I learned to coexist with the silent guardian, leaving small gestures of acknowledgement, a cup of tea left in the study, a carefully positioned lamp, a book returned to its proper place, and in return, the caretaker ensured that the house remained orderly, its hidden corners preserved. But despite the calm, there was a lingering tension, an anticipation that the final chapter of this story had yet to unfold. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the house in shades of amber and shadow, I heard a faint scratching sound from behind a wall panel in the attic. My heart leapt. The caretaker appeared silently beside me, her eyes reflecting both concern and caution. "It's time," she whispered, "to reveal the last secret." She led me to a small, narrow compartment hidden behind old shelves, its existence invisible to anyone unaware of it. My hands shook as she lifted the panel, revealing a collection of letters and diaries dating back over a century. As I began reading, I realized these were personal confessions, family secrets, and unfinished stories, some joyous, others dark and tragic. Each page revealed a layer of the house I had never known, and at the heart of it, a shocking truth emerged. The intruder's sister had not merely died in the house, she had been murdered, her death carefully concealed by members of the family long ago. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. All of her presence, her careful vigilance, her silent existence within the house had been driven not only by love and memory, but also by the desire for justice. She had been seeking recognition, acknowledgement, and perhaps even redemption for the past. The caretaker's eyes were filled with a mixture of grief and determination. "She deserved to be remembered," she said softly. "And now, it is your responsibility to carry that forward. The truth must live, even if it is painful." I felt the weight of her words, realizing that this story, once a tale of fear and intrusion, had transformed into one of legacy, justice, and reconciliation. I spent hours reading the letters, piecing together the hidden narrative, understanding the lives intertwined with the house and the motives that had kept the secrets buried. The intruder, the caretaker, was more than a guardian. She was a living witness to crimes and truths that had long been ignored. My fear had given way to empathy and awe, but there was still a lingering question. What would happen now once the secrets were fully revealed? The caretaker's presence was constant, yet unobtrusive, and I knew that she would remain, silently guiding and preserving the house's legacy. But there was one final twist that I had yet to comprehend, a personal connection that would forever alter my sense of home and family. One night, as I walked through the hallway, I noticed an old portrait tucked behind a layer of dust in the study. It was a young girl, her eyes piercing, her expression hauntingly familiar. I froze. The caretaker appeared behind me, her gaze calm but intense. "Do you see her?" she asked. "She is the key to everything. She is the reason I stayed, the reason I revealed myself, and the reason you are here." My stomach churned as I recognized the resemblance. It was a mirror of my own face, though decades earlier. Confused, I asked her to explain. She told me that the caretaker had discovered a long-lost branch of the family, one that had been erased from history through accident or design. And I was that branch, unknowingly tied to the house's hidden lineage. My presence had awakened the dormant threads of memory and justice, compelling her to step from the shadows and reveal the truth. Shock, disbelief, and awe washed over me. The house, the intruder, the caretaker, it had all been orchestrated by history itself, pulling me into a narrative I never imagined I was part of. My fear transformed completely into reverence. This was not merely a story of intrusion or danger. It was a revelation of legacy, hidden truths, and the invisible forces that connect generations. I realized that living in this house meant not only inhabiting its physical spaces, but also honoring the past, acknowledging the shadows, and respecting the unseen guardians who preserved it. In the final moments of that night, I stood in the center of the living room, the caretaker beside me, and felt a profound sense of closure and awe. The mystery had been unraveled, the intruder's motives fully revealed, and the final twist, my unexpected connection to the house, brought everything into a shocking, unforgettable clarity. The fear that had dominated my life for weeks was replaced by understanding, reverence, and an almost spiritual sense of duty. I knew now that my role was not merely to live here, but to participate in the ongoing story of the house, to honor its history, and to ensure that its secrets, both beautiful and tragic, would never be forgotten. As dawn broke over Savannah, casting light across the intricate details of the home, I felt a quiet, profound peace. The caretaker had completed her mission, not in the sense of leaving, but in the sense of revealing, guiding, and entrusting me with the house's legacy. She remained in the shadows, a silent sentinel, but no longer threatening. I could now live in the house with awareness, respect, and the knowledge that history, memory, and justice were intricately intertwined within its walls. And the final shocking twist had reshaped everything. The intruder was not an enemy, but a custodian. The house was not merely a building, but a living archive. And I was not merely a resident, but a participant in a centuries-old narrative of love, loss, and vigilance. Fear had given way to understanding, tension to respect, and mystery to revelation. And as I stood in the quiet of my home, listening to the faint echoes of lives past, I realized that some stories are too important to be ignored, some presences too powerful to be unseen, and some secrets too vital to ever remain buried.